Mr. Robinson. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to follow the speech of the Honourable Member for Newcastle upon Tyne North, the contents of which I very substantially agree with. And it's a wonderful thing about this debate that it stretches across the divide that so often separates the views of people in this House. But I approach the matter from a slightly different perspective, albeit arriving at similar conclusions, because I see this as the role of the free market. And as a former businessman and entrepreneur, I want to unleash the power of the free market to help solve some of the problems which its historic performance has helped to create. Because too often, Mr. Chairman, the market has been seen as the villain. We talk about business profiteering at the expense of the environment, or of the businesses trashing the world's resources, not just in carbon net zero and greenhouse gases, but also in the use of our biodiversity, as highlighted by the report of Professor Dasgupta earlier on this year, where he said, just in terms of the biosphere, that our current practices were using the resources of 1.6 worlds. So it is true that the market, historically, has been almost totally blind to the cost of carbon in its economic transactions. So when I buy a product like this glass here, I pay for the raw materials, I pay for the design process, the manufacturing, the marketing, the transport, and the profit. But what I don't pay for is the cost of the carbon emission, because it's described as an externality. It dissipates into the atmosphere, and there is no significant cost attached to it. And the result of that misallocation of resources is that the transaction is incomplete. As a purchaser, I'm not having a true economic exchange with the supplier, because I'm only paying for part of the product, not all of it. And as a result, there is no signal for consumers to look at two separate products and identify the differential cost between the manufacturing process of a high-carbon glass and a low-carbon glass. We are blind as consumers. So all those myriad consumer decisions that we take in our economy every day are ineffective in helping to give a signal to manufacturers. So there's no signal through the process to consumers, and as a result, the consumers in their turn do not provide a clear market signal to entrepreneurs and businesses. And so what are we left with? Well, we all know at a governmental level that this is a huge problem, the climate change crisis. And so we have plans from government. We have government picking technology winners, investing in hydrogen, which I hope is going to be a key part of the solution for our net zero progress towards 2050. But it might not be. And the real problem we have is we're relying on the government to take these kind of decisions currently, because the market is very substantially blind, and we need to unleash its power through a price for carbon. Because what we do know about markets is that they are, without question, the most efficient decider of the use of resources that man has ever come up with. And they do that not for moral reasons, but for wholly personal reasons. They wish to maximize profits. And the way you maximize profits is you minimize the inputs. So properly directed by market signals, the market is the most efficient resource user that we can come up with. It also informs millions of decisions, as I previously mentioned, and crucially, the market and its myriad transactions creates the wealth, the individual wealth, which can go on to fund the additional government action that the market on itself is unable to provide. Because whilst I'm a free marketeer, I'm not a free marketeer red in tooth and claw. There is absolutely a role for government to set the structures and to give the long-term signals for the free market, and also to provide assistance and support for those left behind parts of our community that otherwise would be disadvantaged by that process. But the biggest challenge we have in creating a price for carbon is that the United Kingdom economy is not self-contained. We're part of a global economy. So if we raise the price of carbon in this country, which is really another name for increasing the price of energy, then that has a very direct and immediate risk to our domestic economy, particularly our manufacturing base. what happens is that the price of energy is raised in your domestic economy, increasing the cost of your domestic manufacturing base. It either offshores, relocates to a lower cost environment abroad, or it doesn't, and it gets undermined by sucking in lower cost, higher carbon imports, which results in the worst of all worlds, which is a destruction of your own economic base and an actual increase in greenhouse gas emissions as we add in transport costs as well as the cost of production. And so we have, as a result, as an economy, we've been very timid in our approach to applying a cost of carbon. We do in some sectors. About a third of our manufacturing base is affected in some way by carbon pricing through the ETS scheme. But that's just a third. There are 2/3 of our manufacturing base which has no carbon pricing attached to it at all, and none of the imports into this country are assessed or priced for their carbon content. So how do we address this seemingly impossible conundrum? The answer, in principle, is actually quite simple, and it's a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And what that means is that at the edge of your economy, when you have imports reach your border, you assess those products for the carbon content and apply a similar approach to their carbon content, applying a similar price through a tariff as you do on the domestic market. This is not protectionist in principle because it's applying a same price. It's creating a level playing field as opposed to disadvantaging exports in favour of your domestic manufacturing. It must be transparent, and it must be within the permissible exceptions of the World Trade Organization. There is an exception to allow for tariffs in environmental cases. What this does is it allows you to increase the price of carbon, in principle, for your domestic market, safe in the knowledge that imports will have the similar price attached to them. There's been quite a lot of work done by think tanks and others, and I understand, and I hope by the Treasury as well in BEIS, to look into how you could start applying this in practice, because it's a very simple process conceptually, but has the potential to be fiendishly difficult to apply. But if you can do it, the benefits are enormous because it will incentivize the reduced carbon manufacturing processes that we're all looking to achieve in this country because of the market signals. But its benefits expand beyond our borders. Because if you're a manufacturer in a third country, let's say, for example, China, and you export your product to the United Kingdom, you will not want to receive a significant tariff addition to the price of your product. And the Chinese government, or any other third-party government, has a choice. They can think to themselves, well, we can either have a tariff applied to our exports, which then gets paid to the UK Treasury, or we can apply a similar process ourselves and keep the money here within China. The third option is they can reduce the 70 to 80% reliance they have on coal for their energy and reduce the differential between their carbon production and our own. All these are very positive international signals that we can spread beyond our borders through the imposition of a CBAM. And there's evidence that this is already working. Mr. Chairman, you'll be aware that the European Union published on the 15th of July a draft bill to implement a carbon border adjustment mechanism throughout the European Union. And even before that has come to fruition, it's just at draft stage, there's evidence that automobile manufacturers in South Africa are already looking to increase the decrease the carbon content of their manufacturing process because they're concerned that they will be adversely affected by the imposition of a CBAM in the European Union. So even the publishing of a bill, a draft bill, is already having real-world positive impacts on the reduction of carbon. And another advantage that it can provide is the potential for a reshoring of manufacturing production to the United Kingdom. Because what it does is it removes one of the current disincentives for high energy or relatively high energy production in this country, because we do have a price for carbon through the ETS, not one that is sufficiently significant to change consumer behaviour on a more widespread basis, which we want it to do, but enough to provide a minor disincentive to have manufacturing in this country. And if we can remove that disincentive, then it will encourage reshoring. And there's been evidence, or rather a research undertaken by, I think it was Capital Economics, which looked into the steel industry in the United Kingdom and concluded that steel manufacturing its international competitiveness would actually be increased by the imposition of a carbon border adjustment mechanism of between £50 and £75 per tonne through the 2020s. So we have, Mr. Chairman, in my submission, a political opportunity now, not just with the advent of COP26, but more significantly, perhaps, with the drafting of the bill by the European Union, the publishing of it, because it gives us an opportunity to address one of the key challenges to a CBAM, which is how do you deal with the concern, stroke disapproval of large exporting countries who have a high carbon input, for instance, China. We have an opportunity with the European Union to join forces and have a more internationalist approach to the introduction of a CBAM now. It wouldn't hurt, dipping into another language, where we have a certain froideur across the channel currently, and sticking the same approach. What about a bit of rapprochement, where we have a joint, there's a joint objective here, which allows us, with Brexit, we're allowed to be nimble of foot. We can come up with these policies ourselves. We're not held back by a pan-European approach. Equally, it doesn't prevent us from agreeing and cooperating with the European Union when it's in our national interests. And I think this is a great example where our national interests and those of the European Union coincide very neatly. And it gives us an opportunity to build bridges, should we wish to do so. It also helps us in the potential approach to China, in that it's the entire European market that is taking this, or potentially taking this approach, and as well as the United States of America, who has expressed increasing interest in the concept of some form of carbon border adjustment mechanism. I mentioned earlier that CBAMs are simple in principle and hard to apply in practice. I am agnostic as to how we do it. There are many different approaches which have been suggested. We could expand on the current ETS scheme. We could, as Mr. Carney has suggested, take the 5 key products which are internationally traded, so that would be steel, cement, aluminium, chemicals, and so forth, and start on that basis and then build out into the wider economy as we gain confidence and competence in the process of a CBAM. Or we could apply it by sector assessments by country, which would be more of a purist approach, but much more complex to apply. I suspect, Mr. Chairman, that the answer is to start small and to grow as we learn. But the sooner we start, the better. And I've concluded my speech by challenging anyone to come up with a way in which we can impose a price for carbon without some form of carbon border adjustment mechanism.